It's worth noting that something of great significance happens between Abraham's dealing with Abimelech and Isaac's dealings with him, the sacrifice of Isaac. Here is God's revelation of not only his plan of redemption, but also the means of redemption, that God will provide a substitute sacrifice for atonement, that willingness to give up one's only son is a sure proof of trustworthiness, of a fully binding covenant. So, after Abimelech's introduction to Abraham through the incident of the sisterly deception, the Lord blesses Abraham with great prosperity. And Abimelech notices and concludes that Abraham is indeed blessed by God, that God indeed is with Abraham. But he also knows something else about Abraham, that Abraham cannot be trusted. Therefore, desiring to be in the good graces of such a rich, blessed, and powerful man, Abimelech concludes that he needs a treaty, a solemnly sworn covenant with Abraham, to be sure that he is not once again deceived. And Abraham, for his part, wants to assure his access to his wells without constant contention. But let's pause a moment and look back. One commentator reduces Abraham's situation early in his relationship with the Lord to its most fundamental elements. Can Abraham, in fact, trust? Can Yahweh, in fact, be trusted? Faith permits trust. It is unsure faith that wonders about delay. And when Abraham, doubting and impatient, questioned God about whether Eliezer of Damascus would be his heir, the Lord assured him that Abraham's own descendants would be as numerous as the stars. And to seal that promise, the Lord went further. He undertook a great ceremonial covenant to show his dedication and his trustworthiness. Animals are slaughtered and dissected. They're laid out in line. In the darkness, God, represented by a smoking pot and a flaming torch, passes between the animals, thus cutting a covenant. It's the sort of unfathomable, mystical, solemn thing that imparts sacred gravity to an undertaking. One element of God's covenant with Abraham deserves special emphasis. It is not an ordinary contract, certainly not a contract as we conceive of them now. Only the Lord takes on an obligation. Abraham neither gives nor promises to give anything in return. The Lord seeks no consideration from Abraham. God asks only trust, only faith. And this is the nature of God's promise to us. God is the sole guarantor of his own promise. God asks of us only trust. God's plan of redemption, worked out through the Old Testament and the New, is based upon this premise, that God will be with us, that God will be gracious to us, and that we trust him on the sole basis that God is in fact worthy of trust. And we take a cue from God in the covenants and agreements we make among ourselves. This is shown when Abimelech makes his own covenants, first with Abraham and then later with his son Isaac. Their oaths are sworn. They are made solemnly invoking the name of God in the presence of God. That is what establishes their trustworthiness. As one commentator says of these very early covenants or treaties, when pledges are made in the name of what is most sacred, violation destroys integrity and one's relation with what is most sacred. We ought to live in peace. We need to live in peace. But living in peace requires trust and trustworthiness that humans do not command in and of themselves. That is surely one primary lesson of the covenants that Abimelech, Abraham, and Isaac make. Peace and trust are vital. As the same commentator notes, where oaths cease to carry sacred import, where they cease truly to be self-binding and become merely another cynical ploy in one's cause, human relations become a hell on earth. It is this self-binding aspect of a sworn covenant that matters, not the consideration, not the mutual promises. It is the self-binding aspect of these agreements that makes them like those of the Lord. But humans, being human, need consideration. They do indeed need skin in the game, and therefore Abraham, to seal his deal with Abimelech and to assure Abimelech that Abraham did indeed dig the well at issue, produces 7 ewe lambs as security, as consideration to prove the truth of his representations and bind the covenant. Now, the Hebrew root for the words oath and 7 are very similar, and Abraham, having sworn an oath on his covenant with Abimelech that included a well, named the well Beersheba, well of the oath, or well of 7. And he planted a tree there as a sign that he trusted God to provide abundant water for a long time, and built an altar and called upon the Lord, naming him here for the first time, Everlasting God. A solemn and sacred oath indeed. But perhaps the more important covenant here is the one Abimelech swears with Isaac years later, as recounted in Genesis 26. Prior to swearing that oath, the Lord appears to Isaac, directs him to stay in the promised land despite a famine, and very explicitly assures him that God's covenant with his father Abraham extends also to Isaac. I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed because Abraham obeyed my voice. And the Lord gives Isaac a further assurance, not specifically given even to Abraham. The Lord tells Isaac, I will be with you. And the Lord proves his presence and the trustworthiness of his covenant by making Isaac very prosperous and powerful, so that all the nations can see that God is indeed with Isaac. Abimelech sees Isaac's prosperity and power, saying, we have surely seen that the Lord is with you, and again desires a covenant with this powerful, blessed man of God. The author of Genesis is here at great pains to show the parallels between the lives of Abraham and Isaac and how God deals with them. Thus, God appears to each of them, directing them where to dwell and promising uncountable descendants. They each make the same mistakes, particularly with the sister ploy. Abimelech rebukes them both in very similar terms. God blesses them each with prosperity. They each contend with Abimelech over water. They each conclude covenants with Abimelech. They each name a well, indeed the same well, Beersheba, plant a tree, and call on the name of the Lord. The writer wants to leave no doubt that which Abraham received from God, Isaac received also. There is complete continuity. God's promise can be trusted, even across generations. Indeed, the Abimelech episodes confirm Genesis 17, when God declared to Abraham regarding Isaac, I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring after him.